Chapter 5. Zadkiel continued with a look of intense focus on his face. Most people, when they look at their lives and analyze their behavior in an honest way, would admit that they are not perfect. It is even written in Job 15, "Behold, he putteth no trust in his saints. Yea, the heavens are not clean in his sight." So perhaps even the holiest of angels are tainted when beheld by the pure eyes of our absolutely holy Creator. This is interesting because however positively one introspectively inspects themselves, there is an understanding from deep within that affirms this knowing that we are all imperfect and perhaps even broken. In spite of fairly modern man-made beliefs that would tell us that humans actually are perfect, that you only need to truly find your true selves and be it, it doesn't change the fact that you are not totally perfect in the now. And even when you look at the most admirable person you can think of from outside yourselves, you instinctively know that they are also not totally perfect either, however much you may try to reason that they are. This knowledge of imperfection in human beings comes from an inner expectancy of yourselves, where you simply know you can do a lot better, and indeed should do better. Yet it always seems to elude you because there are always bad days where because of your current circumstances or relationships, you fail to meet even your own criteria for behaving in the most loving way, and therefore make excuses for not being so to settle your minds and shun the uncomfortable truth. We are told by the Bible that God is holy. Holy is a mystical word, and alien to you all because it is actually another word for perfect. Perfect is also another word for purely righteous. Because of God's invisibility to you, due to him being immaterial spirit and his immensity, it is very difficult for human beings to imagine him or even comprehend what he is like. But this is even more complicated by the fact that he is truly perfect in every aspect, all the time and forever, and you, as we have seen and most would concede, are imperfect, even if it's only a little bit of corruption that pollutes the well. Can perfect know imperfect like a lover? Can they marry and unite? Is it not like oil and water mixed together? Yes, they similarly repel each other because their very essences are a total antithesis from each other. Is it no surprise, then, that you who are imperfect have no fellowship or intimacy with the one who is perfect? Is it any wonder that you can't see him, don't hear his voice, or can't sometimes even acknowledge his very presence in spite of the evidence to the contrary? In fact, if you're totally honest, you naturally despise everything he stands for, simply because you can't cope with it. From extreme righteousness to extreme justice, you kick against the goads and spit in the face of that which condemns you as being imperfect, for you all know you are guilty of it, yet are helpless to combat it or even make amends. Instead, you like to rejoice in your imperfection, for you can feel comfortable in it when you feel like perfection doesn't exist at all. Instead, for many who have contemplated this obnoxious issue and have attempted to reason with it, their false doctrine states that imperfection simply becomes a process that leads to perfection, although when that cycle ends and suddenly becomes perfection, no one really knows. In truth, you are actually unsure if anyone has ever accomplished perfection before, although there are some, the Buddha, for example, who have been exalted to that position according to their living extreme lifestyles of mortifying natural desires and physical needs of the body and coming under strict discipline to punish what comes naturally to you, all in trying to seek an end to that cycle of imperfection, using both piety and suffering and the theory of multiple earthly lives as a means to fully realize this spiritual ideal that you intuitively and secretly know exists somewhere, seemingly so far away from your all too natural dispositions. Can imperfect ever really make itself perfect on its own merits? How can a history of imperfection suddenly be considered perfect upon simply changing one's mindset to accept imperfection is simply a process that leads to perfection? Anyone can see that the actions speak louder than words, and in terms of eternity, where every moment of time is an unforgettable now moment, imperfection still shouts your crimes in the face of what everyone would consider the perfect way, should they have the wisdom to see it. Imperfection cannot simply be undone, however much you would wish it. We all know that some words or deeds, once spoken or acted out, can never be taken back, and that those you offended either remain bitter against you or need to practice the sacrificial spiritual act of forgiveness so that the wound can heal and everyone can move on. Because mortal time has this healing quality of forgive and forget, imperfections of our past become forgotten by you all, so that you can continue to grow and mature toward what you would all consider a more perfect way of being. Yet it doesn't just simply magically disappear. Personal or corporate history is set in metaphysical concrete and remains forever, whatever wishful thinking might desire. Back to the philosophy of the natures of perfect and imperfect. Can light marry and be in union with dark? Can super hot marry and blend seamlessly with extreme cold? Can the infinite marry with the finite and not become finite itself, rendering infinite to be an impossible theory? Can absolute purity and true innocence marry with the contaminated pollution of utter evil? Can the extremity of the northeast marry and become one with the extremity of the southwest? Can the whole truth meet in union with a total lie and not become corrupted by it? What we find is that these polar opposites speak to us clearly of how human beings relate to God, as you who are very much imperfect can never know and fellowship with truly perfect, unless it is revealed to you in an act of perfect grace to show you that what you have all desired forever. Though you desired it all your lives, you have never been able to ever even contemplate it properly, let alone have it for yourselves to keep without such an act of grace. Well then, if perfect revealed itself to imperfect, would it then become tainted and perverted by it? Or would imperfect instead be changed into perfection's likeness from then onward? Surely the two cannot coexist as each other in each other's presence, that we can be sure of. The dilemma for God, who represents perfection in this parable, is that he wants union with those impure beings who rebel against him. He wants connection with all you disobedient human agents of free will, those imperfect fallen creatures of his handiwork, the rebellious against his ways of absolute purity. However, by his very supernature of complete righteousness, evil, the inversion and perversion of everything he stands for, cannot remain in his presence without being burned up like straw in a raging bonfire, for his spirit is like a purifying fire that burns away the corruption until there is nothing left. What imperfect being can stand in his blazingly perfect presence without being completely exposed and eternally scorched? Such is his immaculacy, and such is your defectiveness. If the average person in the street was asked if they were a loving soul, it seems that most would consider themselves to be so. But when anyone is held up against the terrifying standard of God's love in this regard, you all fall way short, because his way is that of true and perfect love. He would not be perfect himself if this was not so. This is another reason why many hate him, because his penetrating light of honest justice reveals the darkness that enshrouds their warped spiritual hearts. Under the microscope of God's perfect gaze, your many imperfect motives, pride and selfishness, for example, are exposed for all to see. Your innermost secrets are revealed and show you up to be evil in all your ways to the very core, in spite of how you project yourselves to others who cannot see your hidden wicked impulses of the heart. This exposure of the real truth about your imperfection usually leads to a defiance in you against God or repentance. Perhaps it's fair to say that the common reaction is to disbelieve that perfection even exists at all, that you can therefore judge yourselves by your own standard of morality. But those who realize that perfection is not only a possibility, but is in fact the standard you as humans are judged by, they instinctively lament themselves for the recognition of their imperfection and consequently seek pardon. We can therefore see that because of such a concept as the moral standard, imperfection is helpless to change perfection on its own merits, in the same way that a man equipped with only a spade is completely helpless to entirely remove Mount Everest from its designated spot and put it somewhere else. However, it is entirely possible that perfection can change imperfection to be likened unto itself through a covering mantle that grants a grace to imperfection of allowing it to enter into its presence in a righteous way without being destroyed. I believe most people would philosophically agree that in order to be truly perfect, one would hold an extremity of love to its highest degree as its main attribute. Most people would also agree that a very pure characteristic of love is that of sacrifice. You often see, even in different cultures or religions to your own, people uniting with this ideal, that of one giving their life for another, especially when it's undeserved, has a very fitting sense of sacredness to it. Here then is the Christian's claim. I am essentially saying that the spiritual reality of perfect physically incarnated himself into an imperfect and broken world that had all rebelled against him and had become defective in order to redeem it all back and once again give it worth by paying the extortionate cost it would take to cover the imperfection with the mantle of perfection I mentioned earlier. This covering mantle is materialized from the spiritual into the physical realm as innocent and pure blood. Blood contains the life force of a physical being and is as necessary to a biological body as oil is to the engine of a vehicle. In a mystical way, it is also the currency of the universe. Let me explain. Spiritually speaking, there is a certain power in blood when it is shed, especially innocent blood, like that of animals, human virgins, or children because of their purity, that ancient pagan cultures built their gory religions around, because it can grant a certain power to the one that receives it. Motives of how one receives it differ, of course. Some cultures use it to gain spiritual power over their enemies, or for personal gain of some sort, empowered by the very demons they are feeding by it. It is not like this in Christianity. The ancient Jews of Jesus' time and before had used innocent blood as a symbol for atonement from sin with God. And this is the sense in which we understand it was used now, when the Anointed One was pierced and died for the trespasses of the world. There is a power in that particular theology, essentially that wrongs could be made right with this exchange of innocent blood for the guilty. This takes us back to the method perfection used to restore the imperfect, so that imperfect could abide in its presence without being annihilated. A sacrifice so great was made that anyone who believes or trusts in this interaction can, by faith, find the mercy they seek. Grace. You have made this decision to abide in him and forsake evil when your grandfather explained it to you a year or so before he died, and you have been seeking answers ever since. This is why I have been sent to you, to see you grow spiritually and to be able to edify others, including your own currently lost family.